Okay, welcome everybody on this cool Friday afternoon. Today I'd like to welcome Libby Zemaitis and to give us a talk this afternoon. We reached out to, we got Eric Stern and Ryan Torn and I got to know Libby recently in the wake of a planning grant that we submitted on the resiliency of the Hudson River to extreme weather and climate change. And we reached out to DC, and Libby then subsequently reached out to us. And so we're in conversations about some mutual interest in this area. So Libby, just to introduce Libby and then we'll get going. So Libby is the Climate Change Program Coordinator at the Nysdc Hudson River Estuary Program, which is a partnership with Cornell University. Her program supports communities to adapt to climate change and build resiliency using natural and equitable solutions. Libby is a native of the Hudson Valley, where she has spent the past 15 years working on climate policy and sustainable business. She holds an MBA in sustainable business and a master's in climate science and policy from Bard College, and a BA in geology and from Vassar College. And I'll just hand it over to you, Libby. I really appreciate you joining us today, and I look forward to your talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Eric. I don't know if Ryan Torn's on, but it was good to connect with you a few months ago and to have this opportunity to share some of the work we're doing here in the Hudson Valley. Thank you all in advance for taking some time on a Friday afternoon. I'll try to make this as interesting as possible. I'm going to share a little bit of the way we work and some insights that we've gained and some show a highlight of one of our programs that is a collaboration with another university, Cornell University, and then wrap up with some of the more recent work we've been looking at with social equity and incorporating it into our programming. And then finally wrapping up with ideas of how maybe we could get involved, collaborate together, or you could get involved in this type of work in the future. So first of all, our program, the Estuary program, is a non-regulatory part of the Department of Environmental Conservation. So, most of the department does permitting and regulations and works on the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act and those things, but we're actually kind of the carrot to the stick. So we help and empower decision makers to make good choices about our unique ecological area. We do that through technical assistance and grants and education and things like that. We work around a bunch of benefits. Our team is involved in the Resilient Communities benefit. If Albany is part of our area, we're only 15% of the state's landmass, but we have 85% of its biodiversity occurring here. So it's a really rich area. It's the Hudson River's title from New York City to Troy. We have mountains, we have wetlands, we have farms. It's just a lot of ecological diversity. So it's a really special area. We cover the whole region, 10 counties, and about 272 municipalities. So it's a lot of communities, and they're all different. Just very briefly, the context of what we're dealing with in terms of climate change. The state has funded a lot of climate models and projections that have taken the global, the national models and downscaled them for New York State and by region, and identified that the three top trends in our climate are increasing temperatures, changing precipitation patterns, and rising sea level, which again affects the tidal Hudson River up to Troy with daily tides. And those lead to risks that impact humans, things like heat waves, short-term drought, and flooding. The big focusing moments are now basically, a decade ago, Hurricanes Irene and Lee, and then Superstorm Sandy. But that's really when we saw the state putting in a lot more time and effort and funding behind these initiatives. So we've grown a lot since then. Looking forward, the state in 2017 officially adopted sea level rise projections for the whole coastal areas of what we could expect in the future, and encourages communities to consider them and requires them to consider them if they're going to apply for grants or things like that. So you don't need to look at every number on this table. You can look at it online, but for our region, we're looking at up to 75 inches of additional sea level rise by the end of the century. You know, a lot of things probably are developed on the waterfront because we love the water. So that really means that a lot of infrastructure is at risk and a lot of people. Just to demonstrate that on a local scale, we work a lot with the city of Kingston. We actually funded LIDAR. There was a helicopter that flew up and down the Hudson River to get a very fine resolution map of the water levels so we could project sea level rise on it. So these are the maps that project that sea level rise. So you'll see, you know, the red lines is the coastline and where the water comes to from the Hudson River. This is the Hudson River on the east, and then a tributary, the Rondout Creek, coming in on the bottom. So this is really what a lot of our communities look like. They have, you know, a bunch of different things going on the waterfront: recreation, housing, infrastructure, you know, maybe they're often their wastewater treatment plant, things like that. Here, Kingston has one of the very few beaches on the Hudson at the top here in the north. It's got an oil terminal here in the east. It's got a trolley line, this long line. So it's a very interesting place, like many of our riverfront communities. This is today's 1% flood zone. And what that means is, you know, it has a 1% chance of flooding every year based on historical floods. So it's really not necessarily the greatest indicator of flood risk. It might be underestimating. A lot of people also hear 1% 100-year storm. That's what they call it. Oh, it only happens 1 in every 100 years. Well, no, 1% compounded every year is more like a 25% chance storm in over a course of 30 years. So it's a much more frequent storm than people have in their minds. If we start projecting sea level rise on that, 2020s, which is now, we're looking at maybe up to a foot of additional sea level rise. And what you see is these light blue areas appearing on the coastline. Those are areas that we project to become inundated either all the time or during high tides. Moving forward into 30 inches of sea level rise, which could be around, moving to 30 inches of sea level rise, that's mid-century. You start to see a lot of the light blue, and it actually creates an island of this whole waterfront area. So how do you get to that area now? You know, this is a road that's used by trucks all day to get to the oil terminal. So what do you do about that? Down here at the bottom, you see that much of the coastline kind of starting to disappear. 2080s, that blue becomes darker. That means it's deeper water and there's more of it. 2100, the river has taken back much of the land here. So this is basically why we exist. Our team is to try to help communities figure out what their future is going to be and how can they productively respond to these changes that may be outside of their control. I'll mention that this area, can you see my mouse?
Yes.
Okay, this area right above the Kingston Point Park is a fairly new parking lot. It actually floods twice a day with tides, and it's one of the places that you can really see sea level rise, and it's becoming a marsh. And the city actually decided to let it become a marsh and to move the parking lot, and they said it's okay, we're going to let nature take over. And not every city thinks of it that way, but we're happy that the city of Kingston does. So when you look across the whole tidal Hudson River, this is kind of the major risks that we're facing. Basically, today's flood risk, if there was a 1% storm, we're looking at an estimated, about $100 million of damage. This is, estimate based on this model, so it could be quite an underestimate or overestimate, but based on recent storms, I don't believe it would be an underestimate. Looking in the future, that becomes a $300 million problem. That's just one issue. Then what about our tidal wetlands? Our tidal wetlands are extremely important. They're basically the rainforest that we have. They're very unique. Freshwater tidal wetlands are globally rare. They have a lot of different species. So they like to keep, in that point, the intertidal zone, which is now shifting up with sea level rise. So they try to migrate with that. If there's a road or a building or a seawall, they can't, and they just get drowned out and disappear. So we really also want to try to protect that ecological resource as much as possible. And then looking at social vulnerability, we worked with Columbia to calculate the social vulnerability index of all our communities, and then just of the floodplains in the communities. And we find that it is higher in the floodplain. So it's also a social equity issue. I'm just going to pause and look at the chat. I wonder if we have given up on preventing climate change. It's a good point and a good question. And I think especially when I first started working in adaptation, this was a lot of what we discussed. I think, yeah, as someone said, it's both. We've locked in a certain amount of warming, a certain amount of sea level rise that we need to just prepare for. But that absolutely doesn't mean that it's any less important to curb global warming and to mitigate climate change. Both things are extremely important, and I'll get a little bit into that. So our vision is that all Hudson Valley communities are thriving, beautiful models for adapting to climate change, particularly using nature-based solutions. Because as I mentioned, this is a really important natural area, and that's what helps keep us resilient. So we really want to make sure we keep a lot of those natural resources. We personally focus on adaptation because when we were getting started, almost no one was working on that. And we have a lot of partners that already work with mitigation, NYSERDA, Office of Climate Change, things like that. So we wanted to fill that certain niche. We also find that adaptation can be empowering on all different scales. We all share the same global atmosphere, so it's like a global problem to curb climate change. But we have the power to adapt our home, our business, our community to at least a large extent, not entirely, but so that's why we thought it was just very relevant to community level planning. And we define the term resilience when we're talking about climate adaptation to try to understand, well, what should we be planning for? Because we don't want to fall into the same issues of the past where we're just planning for one scenario, hotter or colder or wetter or drier. But if we try to think more adaptively about resilience, it's about just being able to thrive under change and bounce forward to a new normal and not always try to go back to the past, which can sometimes cause more harm than good. So again, getting back to those natural solutions, we really feel like nature is the true expression of resilience. A lot of time, because it's evolved to be that. When a tree gets hit by a big storm, it will grow back stronger, it will grow deeper roots, it will spread in a new pattern. That's what it's evolved to do. So we want to kind of mimic those systems, use those systems. Plus, unlike the hard engineering structures, a lot of times the natural structures provide many other benefits, like cleaning the water and the air and sequestering carbon, things like that. So it's not that they have to be all natural solutions, but whenever you can use them, we like to encourage that. And then again, kind of breaking the cycle, as I mentioned before, of thinking, always trying to go backwards or go back to the way things were, but more just being adaptive thinkers. Climate adaptation isn't like a destination. Okay, we've done it, we're done, we're all good. It's more a process and just how we think about everything and every plan and every project. We just have to think, is this going to work under new normals? So adaptive thinkers, they're curious, they think before they act, and they kind of are willing to unlearn things that they've learned in the past. So that's another thing, we try to just help communities and help people be more adaptive in their thinking. So we're a small team. We work a lot through partnerships and collaboration. So we try to kind of work along the whole value chain for this type of work. One is just getting people talking about adaptation, knowing what their risks are, what are the solutions, and wanting to act. Two is actually providing tools and templates and resources to design and plan for adaptation. And then three is finally actually implementing and activating these projects. We're not a huge funder, but we do provide seed funding and smaller grants that then we've seen communities use to get larger state funds. And we also work quite a bit in state policy, which right now is the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. I'm not sure if you've heard of the Climate Smart Communities program, but it's the state's certification program for communities. It provides a detailed roadmap on how to become climate smart. So a lot of it is about mitigation, but there is a chapter on resilience that has 25 actions. They provide pretty good sized grants. So communities, it's been a very successful communities because a successful program for communities because they want to know, what can I do? How do I do it? Want some funding, and they want some recognition for this work. I mention this now because this is one thing we've seen universities get involved in, and I'll talk a little more about that. So yeah, this is just kind of our last 6 years, our impact in terms of leveraging funds, helping communities get larger state funds, providing technical assistance so far to 64 municipalities in the last 6 years. We help with those different climate smart adaptation actions, usually often funding partners to help communities do them. And then we do more broad outreach. So I'm going to really now go into one of our programs. That's called Climate Adaptive Design. It's a whole program, but the phase one is the studio. It's an engaged landscape architecture studio with Cornell University students. I'm going to show you a quick 5-minute video because that's more interesting than a lot of slides. So let me know if there's any issues with sound here. Global warming leads to a more rapid change in our climate. We have areas that are dry becoming drier, areas that are wet becoming wetter. Intense precipitation has actually increased 71% in the Northeast. So in a lot of ways, New York is dealing with climate change on a much bigger scale than the national average and even the global average.
Our sea level is rising here in the city. There's no doubt about it. In Hurricane Sandy, we had a 6-7 foot surge here, and every inch that the water is higher is just one more inch that it's going to flood our neighborhood.
Residents and business owners want to know, how do I take care of the next high tide? How do I deal with the next flood?
Climate change is coming to every city, and we have an opportunity to make better choices that work for both now and for later.
In order for communities to become climate resilient, they must adapt. One strategy is to use inspirational climate adaptive design.
What are you working on? Oh, you're already doing that. That's great. My name is Josh Serra. I'm an assistant professor in landscape architecture, and this is our Cornell Climate Adaptive Design Studio.
The New York DEC has partnered with Cornell University's Landscape Architecture Department to create the Climate Adaptive Design Studio, or CAD. Estuary program, our program has annual grants that have a lot to do with flood resilience, green infrastructure, et cetera. I'm Libby Zemaitis. I'm a partner in the Climate Adaptive Design Studio, and I link in state resources and the communities into the program.
When you engage municipalities directly in a design studio, you really get teaching, research, and community benefits.
The CAD collaboration supports a program called Climate Smart Communities. It's a certification program similar to LEED for buildings, but it shows how dedicated to climate a community is and provides them funding and support.
We finished projects in the city of Hudson, Catskill, and now we're in the city of Kingston.
The design process begins with site visits to the community CAD is partnering with.
You can see where all the sand is built up.
I work with the students to understand what climate change is. After that, we develop a set of working design concepts, some initial ideas, and then go and meet with people that are in the municipality we're working in. Right now, we'll have a half an hour for the students to introduce their design concept and then have a conversation.
We met with key stakeholders, landowners, business owners, residents, and municipal staff.
So you have to please multiple people while also still trying to be an ecologically responsible designer.
It's really not very pedestrian friendly currently. How did you guys propose to handle that?
So a lot of the communities we're working with, they're small, they're very limited in terms of staff and financial resources. So to have a group of students come in and offer really great design assistance, it's really a huge benefit to them.
Bright young kids. I mean, it doesn't get any better than that, right?
The students are going to take the feedback, incorporate those into their designs when they go back to the studio.
We got a lot of feedback, but people didn't think what we had would work, and they know this is better than we do, so we've changed our design since then.
From there, we go on to move this towards a much more complete sense of what might be possible. Finally, we finish off with our final stakeholder open house.
Can you tell me about your concept here?
And the students present their design alternatives to the community. But that's really where the community process truly begins.
We really hope to inspire communities to change.
And they get back to the original path, and it symbolizes kind of a commitment to change.
We hope that people will take these ideas and develop them further so that their cities can be what they would like them to become.
We talk a lot about building resilience in communities. These Cornell students are really helping illustrate that graphically.
We put a lot of time and effort and work into this. This was a long studio, but it was fun.
The product that they've put together is something that will be able to be useful for us into the future. So can't wait to see what goes on next. To me, the most exciting part of CAD is the fact that we've flipped the conversation around climate change from a negative to a positive.
We're also envisioning that it's going to be something more playful, so people can interact with the water on site. I think this is a great design. I think that solving some of these flooding problems would be really significant.
Getting people to see a vision for the future that brings in economic development, public safety, conserving natural resources. We're wrapping that all in with climate adaptation.
Seeing these visions, seeing these graphic designs, I am feeling inspired.
It's so wonderful to work in the Hudson River Valley. It has such sensitive natural beauty and such character and community. And how we can put that together in a future where climate change is in the mix is really what I think this project is all about.
All right, thanks for watching that. A few more slides and then we can open it up for questions and discussion. So I just wanted to now kind of go into some of the social equity considerations that we've been more focused on in the past few years. CAD has been an awesome partnership with Cornell. I would love to see more partnerships with academic institutions across New York State. It's been a really fun way to work with communities. And I find that when communities work with students, they're able to let their guard down a little bit more and kind of think more outside the box and visionary. So I really believe in that model. And would love to see more of that with SUNY Albany and other groups. So it is a place where we're able to test out a lot of stakeholder engagement strategies over the years and pilot different things and see if they work. So just sharing a few tools we've developed. We've created this stakeholder mapping. It's just a little table here on the bottom left, but it allows us to map out different sectors and scales like public, private, nonprofit, and then scales, local, regional, state, national. And we try to get people from all different sectors and scales engaged in the studio. And that helps us identify gaps. Early on, we had a really hard time getting people to meetings. So we would start pounding the pavement, walking around neighborhoods, dropping off postcards, going to the actual waterfront sites and talking to people. We also recently we're in the town and village of Ossining, where 60% of people identify as Hispanic. So we provided content in both Spanish and English. And in the public library, we put up this bilingual board to seek comments from people and input. We've changed our meeting location and sometimes try to, if we're able to have a meeting like in a church or right in a neighborhood, and that's been very successful. And then another thing is we realized that the actual design renderings a lot of times didn't show diversity in the people that were in them, computer images, but so we've tried to work to include more diversity so people can really see themselves, in these concepts for the future. So kind of, we were into this idea for a few years, but then last year happened and, suddenly there was a lot more concern with social equity, as there should be. And we started thinking even more about the interconnectedness of climate and social risks. It's very clear that they're connected to us. It's also becoming clear that upstate New York is a receiving area. As places flood, as places become uninhabitable, wildfires, et cetera. People are coming to the Hudson Valley. I know it. I meet them every day. I meet people who have come here from California because of the wildfires, people coming from New York City, also because of COVID. But I think just accepting that we're a receiving area is important and thinking about what that means for the future. So if we really achieve our vision of being this wonderful, resilient paradise, well, then we're probably going to have a lot of development pressure and a lot of people wanting to live here. So how would that change? How would that look under our current zoning? How our current planning? How would our demographics change? To me, these are some scary questions that we really need to plan for to make sure that the transition is a good one. So we've been looking more at holistic solutions that address both the natural resiliency issue and the social resiliency. I also became aware of the term green gentrification, which at the time I had never heard of, but makes total sense to me. It's you improve the environment and that can naturally lead to increasing land values, which can lead to gentrification, which can then lead to displacement of people and people being evicted. And this is a huge social equity issue. I believe we're seeing that now in the Hudson Valley. A lot of state grants and state funding is to provide natural, beautiful areas for current residents, especially places that are environmental justice areas, people that have been disadvantaged in terms of past, harm to the environment, pollution, things like that. So even though, the state is trying to do good, sometimes we can inadvertently cause negative impacts. So this is something we're really trying to figure out and how we can work more on it. It affects two aspects of our core work. One is that we're doing those green investments. So we don't want to be spurring gentrification and displacement. But two, most of our work requires community engagement, people to show up to meetings, show up to events, to be part of the process. Well, we've learned that that's not easy for everyone. Some people don't have their basic needs being met. So to be able to just show up, without childcare, maybe without transportation or being paid to a community event, that's not actually really feasible. It's actually quite a privilege to be able to do that. So these are the two areas where you're trying to consider our impact and mitigate these negative consequences. We have found some solutions to the second one. And we've done a lot of research and compiled the best practices for inclusive stakeholder engagement. So, a lot of times, I see sometimes environmental work, you have your own agenda, you have your own goals, and it's hard, you're not necessarily thinking about all the needs of the community. So really instead showing up for the community and the issues that they have. So committing to listening and learning from them and being a little more bottom up, being patient and process oriented versus, again, just wanting to achieve your goal. So a lot of times, I went to communities to talk about climate adaptation, but they wanted to talk about housing and affordability. So I started going to housing events and trying to look for, how the two are related. Building long-term relationships that have benefits for communities. So, not saying, okay, we're going to take all your time to do this research and survey and publish, but what are we giving back? And are we just going to disappear? So I saw another university that, they offered like mini grants after the research project to fund local artists to do like art installations. So that was their way of trying to give back as well. And then really just expanding your partnerships and working with local community-based organizations that might be focused on totally different things, but could help bring in those community needs and be more of a multidisciplinary partnership. And then for actually hosting meetings, there's just a bunch of really great specific advice that you don't have to, I can provide this slide deck to you. Most of it has to do with meeting people where they are. So, having the right meeting locations and times that are accessible for people, providing childcare, transportation, food, paying people for their time, because I'm paid to be there, the municipal staff is paid to be there. Why shouldn't people be paid to have to share their important and valuable perspective? So wrapping up, if any of you, want to get involved or learn more about this work, I'm just going to give 4 different ideas here. One is the last 2 slides with inclusive planning best practices we did publish as a recent webpage. So if you want to check that out or share it. 2, we offer annual competitive research grants to any university in the state. They're small, but they're also pretty easy to apply for. About 20,000 for researchers, 10,000 for graduate or undergraduate student researchers. They're typically released in September or October, due in December for the next year. And if you sign up for my newsletter, you'll get an alert for that. 3 is helping communities achieve those climate smart actions that I mentioned earlier. We're seeing more and more universities getting involved in this program. Just a couple of recent examples. Vassar College down here just helped 5 municipalities complete their greenhouse gas inventory, which is one of the major important climate mitigation steps, and gets them points under the program. Bard College is currently helping 2 communities do another action that's all about reviewing their planning to see if they've considered climate change in their planning. And then obviously the CAD studio that you just saw a little video about, that's also an example of that. So if you want to check out those actions, there's a link and you can see maybe if there's one that could work well in your work or in your classroom. And then finally, our newsletter sign up. So you can, if you want to keep in touch with us, we only send them out every 2 to 3 months, and we try to really focus on, the most important new information, grants, opportunities, events, things like that. This is a current opportunity that if any of you live in a community that's on the Hudson River, the tidal Hudson River, we right now are taking applications. It's a very simple 1-page letter of interest to host the CAD studio this fall. So we've been in, I think, 7 communities now. That video is a little old now. And we'd love to bring it to Albany. So if anyone knows people on the council in Albany or other communities, we'd love for your help sharing this. And last thing, I just like to wrap up by kind of looking backward and looking forward. It's, I personally find a lot of inspiration, climate change and these issues are very intense and deep, and they often require us to think differently about the way we do things and the way we live. And when I look back, whenever I go to a new community to work, I always look back for photos and paintings from like 100 years ago or 150 years ago. This is Island Dock in Kingston over 100 years ago. It was just, I think, a place where they stored coal or something like that. And, this is what most of our waterfronts look like. They were extremely industrialized. They were very polluted. And now look at them, they're very beautiful now. And then CAD and our other programs kind of help communities figure out what they want the future to look like. This is just one example, one concept for Kingston from one student. But I really, when you look back and you see how much can change in a century, it gives you inspiration for what can change this century. And especially now we just have so much faster technology that maybe, in the next 20 years, the progress of the last 100 years is probably going to happen. So that's what we try to do. We try to work from a more inspirational standpoint with communities. Please keep in touch. Also, we're hiring a climate outreach specialist. It hasn't been posted yet, but any day now. So if you know anyone who might be interested in doing this type of work and engaging communities and doing outreach, keep in touch or send me an email. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Libby. It was that was very nice. I will now open it up for questions.
And I'm also looking at if there were, I did get one question from Christopher about, he was in Texas a month ago where there was unusual cold. I think a lot of us probably heard about that. Possible dangers associated with unusual cold events in the Hudson. It doesn't really show up in the projections. The projections show that the most warming has and will happen in the winter. I think on average, our warming has been 2 degrees through the year, but in the winter temperatures, it's 5 degrees. Way lower snowpack, way lower snow precipitation. So I haven't actually seen a lot in terms of like the models with cold weather, but over the past 5 or so years, we've learned that, the polar vortex has been happening, and we have had extreme cold, and that is a major health issue, a heating issue, everything. So I haven't seen a lot about it, but I think you're right that it is an important issue that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, there's some other comments here, Eric. Yeah, there are interesting models from Holland regarding resilient community planning. For example, parks and parking lots that flood gracefully and then can easily be returned to their primary purpose after the flooding event. Okay, that was just a comment, I guess. And I guess that goes along with some of the things that you've been doing with CAD, right? Thinking about those things. Where are we? David, Holland has a history, back to Holland. Holland has a history of recovering land from the sea, first with windmills, which has worked for centuries. It is kind of ironic that the most vulnerable parts of New York State were perhaps reclaimed from the sea.
Yeah, that's absolutely true.
And yes, it was New Amsterdam. That's right.
Yeah, when you look at a map of New York City and where they filled in the water around the coastline, the river and the sea, that is almost exactly where the area that floods. So it's like kind of nature taking its space back, I guess you could look at it that way.
And then Rebecca, do you want to unmute yourself, Rebecca, so I don't have to listen to my voice all the time? Do you want to ask your question?
I can also turn on my video so you see human.
There you
go. Yeah, my question is about kind of from the beginning of your presentation, you talked about resiliency and trying to understand ways that maybe we can not create an engineering solution, but actually work with the natural environment to have more sustainable communities. So that makes me sort of think about other forms of knowledge that maybe do that a little bit better than Western science do. So I'm wondering if you've worked with Indigenous communities in your efforts and ways that you value and integrate other forms of knowledge into your planning.
It's a great question. And I think that I don't think that we have done it yet. And we just really started talking about that as an organization last year. And DEC has a Office of Environmental Justice that has a specialist, Indigenous people's specialist. So we just started working with them and trying to understand how we can do that and who are the different tribes and communities and how do we contact them. We just started getting in contact with the Lenape tribe, which is one of the indigenous tribes down here, and looking to start a few projects with them. So I feel like we're just at the beginning, and it's something that I absolutely want to do, and our director's committed to doing, but I can't say that we've done it well yet. So I hope that it works out, and I hope that we're able to build off the work that we've just started with that. And the DEC, I think, does do it in certain ways with the environmental justice. They have their own grants and programs that if you're interested in learning more, I could try to connect you. I don't know as much about that to speak on it, though.
Just a follow-up question. So you show some work with Kingston. I mean, it's hard to imagine doing work all along the Hudson. So how do you do that? Do you try and
we don't.
Is it best practice? You do projects and then you try and then you move to try to share best practices with other places and that kind of thing? Is that how you do it?
Yeah, it's funny, like so my predecessor, Kristen Marcel, started at the climate program, the climate team here about, I don't know, maybe like 10 or 12 years ago. And I was the first hire after her. And at the time, no one was talking about this. No one was doing it. So we were just like willing to work with anyone, anytime, anyone who wanted to talk about adaptation. But now so many people are working on it and doing it, which is great. So we've, in the last few years, tried to transition our focus to be building partnerships, bringing people together, creating templates and models and resources that multiple communities can use. We also fund counties to help individual communities. So we kind of the county level, we feel like is a really good level, that there's like a little economy of scale where they know their county, they know the issues, they know their communities.
Mhm.
So we really believe, in funding the counties and building their capacity.
And you
And
can-
at this point, we don't do a lot of one-on-one work. The
Mhm.
CAD program is an example of where we do one-on-one work, but most of the programs, it's more partnerships and networks and things like that.
So like Nysdc, I mean, do you interact with them, for the counties?
A little bit, but not much. Our conservation land use team has worked, I think, more heavily with them. I think so far we've like promoted our stuff to them, but I don't believe we haven't really engaged them well. I'd like to though. I don't know if you have any ideas about that. But
Right, we can think about that. So any other questions out there?
I see. Do you imagine that saltwater will ever reach
Oh, yeah.
Albany? That's a good one.
It's tidal.
Right now,
It's already tidal to Albany, right?
yeah, it's tidal to Troy, to the federal dam at Troy. And the salt front is typically south of Newburgh. It goes up and down based on the flows and how much rainwater, and if there's drought, it goes up. If there's a lot of water, like from rainfall, it goes down south. So it will go up to Poughkeepsie when it's really dry, and which is an issue because Poughkeepsie gets their drinking water from the Hudson. And from what I know, I'm far from an expert on this. From what I know, we don't anticipate major shifts in the salt front because you have both issues. You have drought, but then you have more intense precipitation. So it kind of balances itself out. Maybe it'll become more variable going up and down, but we don't necessarily think it's going to go way more up or way more down. But I don't know how much we really know. That's the latest I heard on it.
Jeff asked, can you get to Poughkeepsie? Huh? Problem for New York City water supply too during extreme drought. So the quality, yeah, can get to Poughkeepsie. Sorry, Jeff.
Yeah, during my DEP days, we had issues with that because the city had an emergency intake near Poughkeepsie.
Mhm.
And if you had extreme drought and the salt front got up there, it was a real problem. And then the reverse problem happened because of water. Then it got some administrative hearings because they requested that we get a speedies permit back then for either taking out water or discharging into. It was a really bizarre situation when you have extreme droughts. I don't know if the city is still doing that in terms of extreme drought situations. Consent hasn't happened in many years.
Yeah, we had a decent drought year a few years ago, and in the past, I think 5 years or so, we've been more focused on water source water and source water issues. There's been some issues in Newburgh. It's probably an understatement. And we actually hired a specialist on source water and started developing, because there wasn't actually a lot of guidance or information on it. Started developing some of the tools. We know that person ended up going into the legal department. So we haven't filled that. So I feel like we need to get back more into that because that's going to be more of an emerging issue. And predominantly our work really has been flooding and sea level rise. Heat stress has become more in recent years. So we're trying to incorporate more on that.
So too little water is bad, too much water is bad. We're flooding, that creates contaminants in the water, right, through turbulence and runoff. So so there's a sweet spot for the rain, I guess.
Pretty
Rebecca?
much. I mean, if you look at the projections, it's just like everything's just more extreme, It's like intense rainfall, short-term drought, like it's unfortunate.
Okay, Rebecca,
State funding.
You got a long question there. Ask it yourself, Rebecca, if you can. I'm not going to read it out. Well, you might as well say it.
All right. Yeah, I'm not exactly sure, but my understanding is that some state funding comes with a mandate for project labor agreements. Like if there's this development work you're talking about and developing infrastructure. And yeah, I'm just wondering like how you've interfaced with labor groups. And it struck me in the video you showed, there was one of the people from the city talking about how she was really excited that these sort of new visions were a way of taking something that's like a threat and turning it into opportunity. So I was also just thinking about economic opportunity and unionized jobs for the communities.
Mm-hmm. So I have never worked with labor groups. I imagine our group doesn't really fund implementation. You know, we fund like planning, design, and then other agencies and other parts of our agency like have the big bucks to actually build stuff. And I believe they have done this work and they have certain certain requirements and things like that. But I don't know the details. But in terms of job creation, that's super important. And, you know, if we're so far from like knowing how to adapt, like you need to like study, you know, the information, create plans and designs, the maintenance, the monitoring, like we're still very much in the beginning of this. But I could imagine the NYSERDA's energy efficiency program really, I think, did a decent job of thinking through the whole pipeline and doing job training and worker certification and, you know, providing the free home audits, but then paying the local contractors. They created this whole industry. And I could see that will be needed for adaptation as well. You know, doing resiliency audits, learning what are these key structural solutions and how do you do it and what are the materials and the jobs and the training. I think that's really important, and making sure that it's creating good quality jobs and employing people here and creating more opportunities. I feel like we're several steps away from that, but a lot of us are talking about that, and the Climate Leadership Act and the Community Protection Act has, you know, a huge part of that is about job creation and a just transition. And there's a whole just transition working group, and it's supposed to be considered throughout. So I'm optimistic that, you know, it is going in a good direction right now. So hopefully that we continue to have that support for that.
Yeah, can I just follow up? I agree with you. I think, however, there's not, for example, on the just transition working group, there's not there are no representatives from labor who are sitting on that board. So I think that there's a need to engage labor groups in community spaces, because it's not really happening on a state level in a way that I think is very productive at this point. I think it's still like a very challenging thing, like a challenged relationship. So within every community, there's a area labor council. Like here we have the Shore Area Labor Council and the Central Hudson Labor Council. So these are groups that they have people coming from the building trades, utility sector, nurses union, things like that, and tend to represent a variety of labor perspectives, and maybe would be great community partners to start thinking about, you know, when you're creating the adaptation plans, what kind of specialties exist in your communities to be doing construction and things like that. And also a lot of unions have training integrated within their union structure. And so there's sort of the state level training, but also within the labor groups, they have their own trainings, and finding out what kind of trainings they have that are related. So maybe there's, pipe fitters that have energy resilience or energy efficiency trainings that are starting up for their journeyman and stuff like that. So there might be already things ongoing or things that could be ongoing through partnership. So that might be, if you're bringing people together, bringing labor to the table within communities might be more effective than waiting for it to happen at the state level, because, I haven't really seen that happen personally.
That's really good to know. And I'm on 2 of the working groups for the Climate Leadership Act. So I will bring that exact comment into the recommendations, because that's not something that I've just personally really thought about or heard much talked about. So I'm happy to bring it up, and it's helpful to hear that. I didn't even know there was an area labor council in each municipality. So I just took a note of that, and we have a session next week to provide feedback on the current draft recommendations for that law. So I'm going to promise to mention that. Thank you.
So we have another question here from David. I think it's a balance between, how does DC balance climate change with existing pollution on ongoing sources? I guess that's the mitigation versus adaptation question again. But you have separate groups dealing with those things at DC, right?
Do you mean balancing just the effort put into each issue?
I guess so, but David, maybe you want to add to that. I think so. I think it's just how you weight it.
Okay. Yeah, I'd say, I mean, you know, the pollution issues and the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act, that's our mandate. That's the DEC's mandate. That's the bread and butter, I guess you could say, and what we're legally required to do. And I don't see any, you know, that certainly isn't going away. I think the effort on climate change is just growing and growing and growing. The Office of Climate Change was founded not that long ago, I think less than 15 years ago. You know, it's growing. They're hiring for the new Climate Leadership Act. I think they're supposed to hire like 80 positions or something like that. Not all in that office, but, you know, to work on that work. That was before COVID. So, you know, it didn't happen. But so I think it's just going to be growing and growing, especially since they're related issues. But yeah, I'm not really sure other than that.
So I have another question. So I'm sure you're aware there's a lot of discussion about I-787 and moving Albany downtown closer to the river one way or the other, even moving the town or moving the river. I don't know which. But that sounds great and very nice, but it's fraught with problems, right? Based on what you're sharing. Yeah,
I would bet.
I presume DEC is going to be heavily involved in anything planned or dreamt in that area.
I'm sure. Yeah, I don't know much about it. I've heard of it, but yeah, a lot of our program has done a lot of work in Albany. I haven't personally. I'd like to. But yeah, it's just amazing how much we still haven't learned, you know, like when I went and did a tour of 10 waterfront communities that applied for our CAD studio in 2019. And I just went to the waterfront to check it out with the professor. And it's like every single place had like luxury high-rise developments going up like right on the water's edge. And, you know, it's like, I know, of course, that I have my own, you know, I come from a certain place and thinking about this, but, you know, just thinking about, you know, it really is a risk to people and property. And it's just amazing that it really hasn't gotten through yet to the actual, you know, what developers are proposing and what's getting improved at the community level.
Okay. I think we can probably draw things to a close now, unless I think, but I'd just like to thank you, Libby. I think you stimulated a lot of interest. I think your contact details are there for anyone that wants to follow up by email. And I'm sure we're going to interact more down the road. I think several of our activities, as you know, with planning grants and whatnot, will benefit, I think, from greater interaction with you and your colleagues. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm just typing in my email there in case that's helpful, and then just quickly put one of our web pages that has some of the resources I've mentioned, and also the sea level rise mappers and different things that may be useful. So thank you all for your time, and I hope you have a good weekend. I hope to collaborate more with you, Chris, and anyone else.
Definitely going to be in touch.